Hi there and welcome to Pinterest Studio. This is Natalie and I'm so glad you're here. Today I'm going to show you a project that I created with the Happy Heart collection, and this is my first video with it. I've already created a project, but this is my first video for Pinterest Studio and I love this collection. I think we're all in love with the collection. And the inspiration for this is going to be my favorite place paper. It has like a minty teal look for it and it has some leaves on it. So I'm going to show you how I translate it into the layout. So I'm starting to create it I'm starting with my background. My apologies on that. So I want something that has a lot of contrast with the flowers. So the flowers are really pastel and soft. So I'm going to create something a little bit more grungy for my background. So I'm starting with watercolor. I'm going to pick up the colors from the collection, and the collection has quite a bit of teal and mint. I'm going to use the same tone, but I'm going to go a little bit darker than the tones in the collection, and I'm using that so that the flowers and everything that I put on top of it, because it's lighter, is gonna pop. So I am using a little bit of, I'm going to say medium tone teal. I diluted it with a little bit of extra water on a piece of acetate or plastic, and I'm going to apply it onto my cardstock. And I am using actually Bicky Boutin foundation paper. This is heavy cardstock, 140 pound. If you don't have this, you can use watercolor paper, or you can use a piece of cardstock that you have added yeso to it, because I'm gonna use quite a bit of water. I needed to make sure that my paper was gonna withstand it. So the way that I'm applying my background, I'm creating my background, is by using a brayer. So what the brayer is going to create, first of all, is an easy way to apply the ink or watercolor, in this case, in a larger scale, kind of in an even surface. But what it's doing to my background, in this case, I chose a brayer that is only like, I think it's 2 inches wide, is every time I do a pass, it creates these small lines, because it marks the lines of the roll. So every time I pass it, it creates these lines, and I like the look of it, just because you have that tone of the watercolor. When it sits, it kind of blooms, it creates that organic puddle, but then you're drying the paint at the same time, so it creates this beautiful effect. The only thing I don't like about the applying the ink, or in this case the watercolor, with the brayer, is that it creates harsh lines at the end of the application. I want something more of a watercolor effect there. So what I'm going to do is, you're going to see that I'm bringing my brush and just kind of softening the edges of the application so they look more like those little puddles that you see when you apply watercolor. Simple as that. You saw that I started by applying everything on the right because it was closer to my palette, but then in reality everything is going to sit on the left of the page, because the photo that I'm going to use, my daughter is facing towards the right. And you're going to see that I make sure that I applied quite a bit of watercolor so that it peeks from behind my photo. Now, like I said, the inspiration for this page was my favorite place, which has like this minty paper with white leaves on it. So I'm going to replicate that on my page. I am using the Thrill of Hope stencil, and it's actually a wreath. I'm going to use the wreath, but I'm going to use it not as a wreath, but just in parts. I want to kind of mimic the idea of the paper. I'm using white embossing paste. The one I'm using right now is from Tinting, and because the stencil is, I'm just using a stencil one from the set, and because the stencil forms a wreath, I don't want to use it as whole, so I'm going to just apply the paste just to the one half, and that's going to create just that kind of branch. And then I'm going to move my stencil so that the other branch starts at the center of the one before. Now that's fine for the first one, but as I continue doing that, I am actually gonna touch the previous application. So to make sure that I don't contaminate the entire page, I'm gonna make sure to clean my stencil, the back of it, because before I continue going. And I'm just gonna repeat this procedure until I have leaves throughout the entire area where I have watercolor. No more than that. No more than that. It's enough. Even though you see them right now, I'm going to cover them in watercolor again. So I'm going to make sure that this dries completely before we go on to the next step. So while it dries, I was thinking I could leave them as white, and I debated with that, but because, like I said, I want to make sure that my flowers and everything that I put on top of it is gonna pop. I wanna also create this idea of having this kind of grungy background, but delicate at the same time, and all the delicate leaves and flowers from the collection. So what I'm gonna do right now is I'm gonna mix a little bit of baby blue with some green to come to a kind of a minty tone, which is in the collection, and I'm gonna apply this watercolor right on top of the leaves. what this is gonna cause is literally it's gonna tint the leaves, and it's gonna make them, you're gonna see that they're gonna get lost on the background, and that's okay. The color is quite deep. Some of the leaves are gonna stay white, some of the areas are gonna look like, literally I'm just adding a splatters of color on top of the leaves and moving it around a little bit so that it kind of fuses with the background, and that's all I'm gonna do. And I'm just gonna apply this watercolor right around the leaves, nothing else. I wanna, like I said, my idea was to tint the leaves. I want them to add the texture, but I don't want them to be white. For my layout, if you want them white, then that's completely up to you, but you're gonna see at the end why I'm tinting my leaves. So again, to finish, I'm just gonna add some splatters of the color. I made it a little bit darker so you can see the difference with the teal before, and I'm just gonna splatter on my page, and I'm gonna let it sit for a little bit, maybe a minute or so. And what I'm gonna do right now is I'm gonna take a baby wipe. You can use also a paper towel dipped in water, but very lightly. You're gonna wanna take as much of the water as you can, and all I'm doing is kind of buffing or cleaning all the leaves. I want the leaves to have color, but I don't want to have them that deep of a color. So what I'm doing with my baby wipe, and I think you can see it, is literally I'm cleaning the leaves carefully, and all I'm doing is just taking away the watercolor that's sitting on top of them. So by doing this, I'm lightening the watercolor. So you're gonna see when I clean everything, you're gonna see the background, you're gonna see like a puddle of a different tone of watercolor, and then you're gonna see leaves. They're gonna be a little bit lighter than the watercolor that surrounds them. Some parts will be white, some parts are gonna get lost, but that's just gonna bring the texture of the leaf forward without becoming white. Again, that's a personal choice, and I love how this turned out. So I'm actually gonna use the paper that's the inspiration for this background as part of the paper layers for my photo. So I set aside my background to dry completely, and I'm gonna start using paper. I'm gonna play with paper. So first thing, I'm gonna back my photo with a piece of the sunny and bright paper. This paper has like a pink and yellow watercolor, and I want that because it's gonna pop from the page. And then I'm gonna use a piece of my favorite paper behind it, but I'm gonna add a piece of chipboard in between the layers. That's just gonna make sure that the photo kind of pops from the page. I'm also adding a piece of the journaling bits. I love the little kind of stamp seal edge, so I wanted to bring that onto the page, and also has that little kind of mustardy yellow that you have on the layout. And then right now all I'm doing is just kind of setting up my idea, and my idea is I want to have a column of flowers on the left hand side of the photo, and then just move from there. So you're gonna see that I've attached my paper layers onto the background, and I'm using strong glue for that because mixed media makes things slippery. So you have to make sure that you add like, a glue that is gonna hold everything in place. And all I'm doing right now is just playing with the floral ephemera to create that column of flowers. I'm gonna add some foam adhesive in between just to make sure that I create those different levels on the flowers. Think of it as dimension, adding movement. Now one of the things is, even though I said I'm gonna add a column of flowers, I'm not gonna cover all the paper. Instead, I'm gonna kind of take a little pause or a little space where I have that journaling bit. Remember, like I said, I love the edging of it, so I'm gonna make sure that I move the flower a little bit lower so you can see flowers, you can see the detail of the piece, of that journal piece, and then you see more flowers at the bottom. At the same time, a lot of the mixed media that I added on the background unfortunately does get covered with the papers. So instead, I'm going to be very mindful of what I add at the bottom and in some areas of my layout, because I don't want to cover those leaves. So instead of, for example, at the bottom, I could use that long leaf that came in the cardstock sticker. Instead, I'm going to choose a small one so that it doesn't cover the leaves that's at the bottom. Same thing on the left, same thing on the title. I actually look for pieces from the title ephemera that fit right in between those two leaves. Like I said, they're not going to be that noticeable, but you can see them. So I'm being very specific of where I place things so that you can have like still the peak of the leaves at the background, and actually some of the background and the pieces just kind of fit in between. So that was my idea. Like I said, grungy but delicate at the same time. And all I'm doing right now, I'm just adding a few extra pieces. I added that little yellow flower because it creates movement. It ties the clusters to the title. I added that little kind of embroidery hoop from the wooden embellishments, and I think it just, you know, ties the whole thing together. Fussy cutting a few butterflies. I had the little one that's on top of the embroidery hoop from another project, and I'm just fussy cutting 2 more. One is gonna go on the top of the layer in that big cluster. Another one is gonna be right next to the title. You're gonna see that I added a few more pieces of ephemera right at the bottom of the photo, and I also added some of the puffy stickers to the picture. My title, like I said before, comes from the title ephemera. I added some foam adhesive behind it just to make it pop from the page, and because I have a lot going on, I don't want to add much more. Instead, I'm going to bring some more of that gold using the gold metallic pearls from Pink Fresh Studio, just so that, you know, it marries everything together. And that's about it. I love how this turned out. It did take a while to put together just because the background requires me to dry the in between stages, but I love the texture, I love the color. Like I said, I wanted something grungy, but it was gonna contrast and, like, you know, pop the leaves without being black. And you're gonna see it right now, you're gonna see the photos. Love how this turned out. As always, if you have any questions, do not hesitate to contact me. I would love to help you. Everything that I use besides the watercolor and the texture paste is available in the Pink Fresh Studio shop. Make sure you check it out. The entire collection is there. As always, thank you so much for joining me, and do not forget to subscribe to the channel. There's always lots of beautiful projects being added. Thank you so much for joining me, and I hope to see you soon. Take care, guys.